Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Morgan. Today, my guest is Hugh Blane. He has a new book coming out in July of 2024, Lead Boldly: How to Coach Others to Greatness. And that is exactly what today's podcast focuses on. How can we create management strategies that help us unlock our hidden potential? How do we create the customer experience mindset in ourselves? And what is the best way to navigate a difficult conversation? We also talk about who to go to for advisory or feedback. And is feedback actually good? Hugh has a ton of consulting experience. He has worked at Tom Peters as a consultant. He has the Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholders certification, and he's currently president of Claris Consulting. And he's been doing that for almost 15 years, where he helps executive teams and boards convert human potential into accelerated business results. We have such a good conversation. Please enjoy Hugh Blane. Hey, Hugh, welcome to the Modern Customer Podcast. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling from outside of Seattle, Washington, little beach community called Normandy Park.
Yeah, I almost moved to one of those little communities right on a lake, and I can't remember which one. It was so beautiful. It was one of those COVID real estate shopping, moving someplace you never thought you'd
Uh-huh.
live.
Yeah. Yes.
Very
Right.
cool. Have you always lived there?
No, native born Scotsman. Lived there for the first 9, 10 years of my life. Went to Canada for 1 year, Birmingham, Alabama for 18, and I've been out here ever since.
That's interesting. Okay, when you say Scotsman, like legit Scotland?
Like very much Scottish. So when I use the Scottish accent, everybody says that they now know that I'm Scottish.
Yeah.
But I will stop that because all of my Scottish relatives say that that is the worst Scottish accent imaginable.
Okay.
But for all of us in America, it proves that I'm Scottish.
It's pretty authentic. That was pretty shocking. I think all of our listeners probably kind of want you to like stay that character for the
I
whole
know.
show.
They always say, can you just talk that way the entire time?
I
No,
have to
I
say, it's
can't.
kind of an appealing accent, and I think it's just all the best characters in so many
Mm.
shows we grew up, movies we grew up with, like have like that accent. Maybe it's the
Well,
Robin
think about it.
Williams.
Sean Connery. Who would not want to be Sean Connery?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Well, okay. Well, we could talk about Scotland all day, but tell
Okay.
tell us. So you Canada and then Alabama. Was that for work?
No, that was just for us to immigrate from one country to another.
Oh,
My
okay, got it.
father had a business reversal in Scotland, and we decided to come to the land of opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, so glad
Mm,
you're here. You are a career consultant. You've had so many
mm,
interesting consulting jobs and coaching, I should say. What is the
mm.
key? And we have a lot of managers watching this that manage people, run teams. What is the key to being a great coach?
I love. Well, first of all, start the interview with a really good question. What is it about coaching? Here's a radical idea. Care deeply about the other person.
Yeah.
Let's just start there, right? So I had a coach by the name of David Litton when I was 12 years old. And I was a kid that had just moved to America. Everybody was playing football, and I was just way too small. I was going to get pulverized if I played football. But David Litton saw me and said, "You're really fast. You can run fast. Why don't you join the track team?" So at a really early age, someone came alongside of me and said, "You will get pulverized if you do this, but if you do this, you can excel. I think that you actually have the ability to be great at track and field." And he
Right.
was right. So I think the first thing is, do you really care about the other person? And if you do, that's a great place to start.
What about when we're in a situation where we honestly don't love the people on our team or the customers that are in front of us? Like, is there a way to mentally, because a lot of people that are listening run contact centers. It's a really tough job.
Uh,
You're having unhappy people call in, often yelling at agents for problems that aren't the agent's fault. I mean, is there a way to fake caring?
No, but there is a way to align the work with something other than what you're experiencing day to day. So let's do this. There's a great quote that I read once that said, all human relationships die the moment that one person does not feel cared for. So,
Right.
you just have your listeners think about that in your personal relationship, professional relationships. Let's talk about a call center, for example. It is a such hard job. I called one recently, and it was really hard for me to understand the other person, number one. And number two, they were just reading a script. And so in that context, the way that companies structure their customer interaction, I'll say that sometimes they default to the lowest common denominator and they put people in a really tough situation, almost one where they can't win. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that that's probably the missing link for contact centers all over the world is that often companies don't want to deal with it. They don't want to invest in them. And
Right.
unfortunately, it's the place where the customer, I mean, that's an opportunity to touch a customer, which is a marketing
Absolutely.
opportunity.
Absolutely. Right. So it's a short sighted company. So, but with that, then if I'm there, I'm probably doing the job and saying, this is a stepping stone from here to someplace else. And I may not love the work, but what I may do is I may love what the work provides me for my family. It may be that I love that it's a stepping stone and I can see the end result. So we have to put it in context. So I would coach the person to say, listen, difficult things are done every single day. And if this is difficult for you, let's keep the end in mind. What are you doing this for? How long are you going to have to do it? And let's put it in context so that you can at least do one thing to make it work in your favor. Does
Hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think one of the things that I've noticed about you and your career is you really show people a different way of thinking, like
Mm,
uncovering hidden potential. Um, Tell us about your new book
mm.
and what it is to lead boldly and uncover potential in our teams and ourselves.
So I'm going to go back to something you just said, Blake, if I can, just because I want to double click on it because I think it's really important. I did not think this way for a long period of time. I got to a business reversal myself when I was 48, and I thought that I had purchased a company, I was turning it around, doing all kinds of stuff. The financial crisis hit, and in a short period of time, like 6 months, the financial crisis hit. One of my business partners got cancer. I bought out one of my partners. The bank called the line of credit and somebody embezzled $180,000.
Oh, no.
That all happened. So the financial freedom that I had was all gone. And I realized that what I was doing is I was putting money ahead of everything else, right? So I'm going to come back to ask your question one more time because I wanted your audience just to hear that context,
Yeah.
that mindset piece was not something I was really great at. So this book is I'm leaning into the idea, how did I make the transformation from having somewhat of a poverty mindset?
Right.
And how did I make that transition from scarcity to really abundance?
Well, I think
Because
that's so
there,
relevant now too, because we're kind of in
man,
a similar time. People are really
yeah,
struggling.
if you look at the data has not moved with regards to the level of engagement in corporations for like the last 25 years. Especially after COVID now, people feel, get this, here's the statistic, 58% of employees trust a stranger more than than their direct supervisor.
I believe
Now,
that.
that's 58% from 2018 from a Microsoft study. And oh, by the way, that was 2018 before COVID.
Yeah.
How is it today? So when I look at why I wrote it, is I said, I believe that there's one word that's missing from the American business lexicon, and that word is love. And so Steve Jobs said it best. Steve Jobs said, if you're going to do great things at work, then greatness requires that you love what you do. And if that love is not there, then you're not really going to create any, you'll create good things, but you're not going to create great things. So the people who came into my life and who helped elevate my thinking and who elevated my business, I wanted to then pay that forward. And so
Mhm.
I wrote it to say, you have to create greatness for yourself first, and this is how you do it. The moment you do it for yourself, it is incumbent upon you. It is a responsibility that if you've been given it, to then give it to somebody else. The idea is can you fall in love with an idea, a dream, a hope, or some sort of aspiration for yourself and for those around you? So for example, I love the idea of converting human potential into inspired performance. I love it. I get up every single day, I think about it. But you have to learn how to do that. So I am continually learning more and more about my customer. I'm continuing to learn more and more about my employees. And if I love on them, they will in turn love on the customer, right? Now, the idea of living boldly, getting outside of the safe, the comfortable, the soft confines of what is known and predictable, that's a bold act. And I think that the only way that we can act boldly and outside of the comfort zone is to fall in love with something and then learn about it every day so that it prompts us to then do something today that's a little out of the ordinary. Am I
So
answering your question?
yes, I love
Okay.
that. And I mean, I talk a lot about mindset too because I think it's so
Mm.
important and we almost feel like it's old hat. Like, well, yeah, we know that mindset matters, but I'm not sure it's ever mattered as much as it matters now because we're not getting it from the external because there's so much bad news. And I just feel like in the morning when we wake up, like many of us are up against a lot because the news out there is so negative. So what are the things that a person can tell themselves to clear their mind, to be in a place to receive? Sounds very woo woo, but honestly, receive and give love because that is what we're talking about in a way. And it could
Can
be
I give a
self
real?
love.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, you can't give to anyone something that you don't already have,
Got it.
right? You cannot do that. I mean, that's like trying to give CPR if you're dead. I mean, you can't do it, right? So let's go back to something. Here's a radical idea: turn off the news.
Right.
So here's a psychological thing. So we know that there's something called selective attention. And every day, so let's be clear, we choose what we give attention to. If you wake up and at the end of being awake for 90 minutes, if you feel a little depressed, if you feel despondent, if you feel despair, then one of the things you can do is you can say, wait a minute, where's this coming from? I will suggest it's what you're putting into your brain and you're feeding that every day. So let's just be this clear. Take responsibility. What are you feeding yourself? And be very intentional and purposeful about that. So that's like number one. Number two, I start every single day with reading something that is uplifting and inspiring for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my morning prayer and meditation time. So what I do is I just make sure that my head is on straight. And small other thing, I set an intention for the day. What am I going to do? I'm going to get on a podcast. I'm going to meet Blake and we're going to have a conversation about delighting our customers. Okay. What is it that I think I could share that might be of value? So I am intentional about that. And then the research says is that at the end of the day, if you want to manage your mindset, start a gratitude list.
Yes.
It's a simple thing. 3 things that you're grateful for, 3 things that just went your way. And it could be something really simple, Blake. It could be, I got a new pair of running shoes and the pain that was in my left knee went away. Great. What else? And once you start with 3, you put them on the paper, and then here's the advanced maneuver. Write down next to it, why is that important to you? And what you can use those for is a catalyst for what you're going to do the next day. So then your mind is percolating on it overnight. And then you wake up the next day and say, well, here's my intentions. This is what I'm going to do. And it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. You worked as a consultant at Tom Peters and you've had so
Mm-hmm.
many different consulting jobs. What is the right balance of nurturing relationships, because we have salespeople listening to this podcast, nurturing relationships, being personable while also keeping healthy boundaries and holding up professionalism. Like, what's the great
Mm.
balance there?
Wow. That's a really interesting question because I could go in a couple of different directions with this, but let me do this. If you're in sales, sales 100% is a relationship business. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Robert Cialdini who wrote a book called Influence back 40 years ago. If you're in sales, you have to read this book. Unquestionably, you got to read this book for two reasons. It's science-based, so there's no fluff. It's all, it's science, it's data, but it's also incredibly easy to apply. So, for example, if you're in sales, do you look at the customer or the person that you're trying to sell? One of the principles is liking. Do you actually like the customer? If you don't like the customer, do you think the customer is going to pick up on that? Absolutely. So the balance is, who are the people that you really want to have as customers? Who's your target audience? Do you really like them? And if you like them and you want to serve them and you want to kind of love on them, then that's something that you'll just kind of do naturally. Now, you asked the question, how do you find balance, though, with doing that? And that some people are just kind of, shall we say, unpleasant, and you don't want to work with them? Is that a good context?
Well, it's not even that. It's like, I'll give
Hmm.
you an example. Like, I
Hmm.
was on a consulting project in Europe, and I went, and the client wanted to go to dinner. So I said, great.
Hmm.
And he wanted to bring along another colleague. Well, first, it ended up being at a bar, which is like a really unique bar with a mixologist, and the guys, like the
Hmm.
owners, has 1,600 rare liquors, and it's this whole thing. And then dinner probably started at 9, and it's like a 5 to 6 hour thing. Did I know I was going to be doing this whole, I mean, that's part of, what we do, like getting clients. You go to the dinner. Sometimes
Hmm.
conversation topics are brought up that, probably wouldn't discuss on this podcast. It's
Yeah.
not like it's not appropriate, but you've got to know how to navigate these topics today. And sometimes it's
Yeah.
uncertain what is okay and what is not okay to say in this
Yeah.
environment,
Right.
especially. So, do you have any advice just how to carry yourself, like as a consultant or salesperson out in the world doing these dinners? You do not exactly know who you're talking to all the time, and feeling good when you go
Yeah.
to bed.
80% of the time, don't talk, just listen and ask questions,
Right.
right? Keep
Smart.
your mouth shut,
Yeah.
right? It is hard. Now, the moment that it gets hard, so here's the way I approach stuff like that, because there's a lot of topics that are just, you should not be talking about. So here's a line that I like to use. Well, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Right.
How did you come to that? Huh, that's interesting.
Love
So
that.
there's a lot of people that maybe feel differently than that. So how do you navigate that? I will I'm really good at just learning how to ask questions. And if someone says, "Yeah, but what do you think?" I say, "You know what? What I think in this context, in this conversation, may be less important because you're a customer and that's your experience. Oh, excuse me, you're a client and you've got this experience. So I just really want to understand that." Um, Talk less,
You're
ask
so
more,
smart.
and I bet you could go for 85 or 90% of the time just asking questions, learning about them, and they would think that you were an excellent conversationalist and they wouldn't know
Yeah.
anything about you.
But how does that translate into leadership? Because there's the balance where, like, employees want to get to know their boss, their leader, and those relationships will be stronger, I think, if there's a more personal bond. At the same time, as a leader, you want to be perceived as strong. There's a vulnerability, there's a line. So how do you decide on the line to draw?
Mm, that's really interesting. I think it's different so there's a lot of ways to answer that. What's the context of the company? What is the culture of the company? What are the values of the individuals? So, what I can do to be authentic, to be transparent, to be in integrity, I could say something along the lines of, in this particular situation, it reminds me of one of my core values. And one of my core values is this idea called, and I talk about this in my book, humble swagger. I believe that we all need to be learners. And in this context, I'm more interested in learning and not having all the answers because I want to hear from everybody else here. But I am also rooted in this idea of swagger, which is confidence, which is I know that if you put smart people into a room that are all geared towards one particular direction, one purpose, amazing stuff happens. So that for me shows up in almost all parts of my personal life and my personal life. My professional life and my personal life. So what I do is I can talk about values, I can talk about experiences, and what I do in some of my coaching work is I help leaders create the narrative that is sincere and authentic so that they can talk about those values and then follow up with questions so that they are aligned. It's sharing who they are, what's important to them, why it's meaningful. But it's also a beacon to everybody else as to this is how we do business.
Okay, so you mentioned framework for your coaching business. Would you share with us the framework? Is there something that we can hear about that is the framework that you use every time?
Yeah. Here's the framework. Coaching is done with people who have three characteristics: courage, humility, and discipline. So let's put this into context. I can meet a lot of people who say that they want to do something and intellectually they are 100% on board. I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Great. Do they have the courage to look in the mirror and say, there are things that I am not doing now that I need to either stop doing or start doing or keep doing? Do they have the courage and the humility to say, I cannot do this on my own? If I could do this on my own, I would have already solved it. I don't need a coach. And then the discipline is, do you have the discipline to repeat and to declare a goal and work on it for 6 to 9 months? So those are the three principles. We do something called stakeholder-centered coaching, which is that we put the stakeholder front and center. I tell my clients, I will provide you with a 94% success rate if you follow the system. And the system's really simple. Go to your audience and tell them you want to get better as a leader and interview them and say, tell me what I do well. Tell me what I don't do well. If you could give me one goal where I could get significantly better and it would be in service of you and other stakeholders, what's the one goal? And then I ask this really important question. Can you give me 2 suggestions about how I would do that? So I go and interview them and then I thank them. Thank you very much. This has been really helpful. It's hard. So then you go away and you think about it. So you thank them, you think about it, and you say, what's the goal? Now, I have my clients interview 10 of their stakeholders. We find the one goal, and then what we do is we go back to them and we tell them, this is the one goal I want to get really good at. Here are the 5 or 6 behaviors that I'm going to exhibit in order to do that. And I'd like for you as a stakeholder to have a conversation with me once per month over 9 months about how I'm doing. And it will only take 5 or 7 minutes once a month. I'm going to come to you and say, what have you observed the last month? What 2 suggestions can you give me to get better? And then you do that month in, month out for 9 months. That's how you get better. So, and then, a couple of times over those 9 months, we do a mini survey. And 94% of the people who have the courage, humility, and discipline to engage in the process, they get better.
I got some advice as a speaker once from my coach, and he said that unless someone is really invested in your success, you don't always want to ask for feedback like after the speech.
You don't.
Unless someone wants you to be successful, because anyone could just say like, I don't like you, or the air conditioning wasn't on high enough in the room. Like, you have to be careful who you ask for feedback from, because if they're not invested in your success, they can hurt you. And you, honestly, you might throw in the towel. You might feel like, I don't want to do this anymore. So what is your advice as far as who to ask for feedback from and when?
So you just used 2 words somewhat interchangeably, and I want to double click on it. I don't ask people for feedback.
Okay.
I ask people for advice. And the reason being is feedback is something that people can just throw away, and they do it indiscriminately, and they have no responsibility for what happens after they deliver it. So I don't care about the feedback. And oh, by the way, for your audience, unsolicited feedback has nothing to do with you, the person who's getting it. It has everything to do with the other person.
Right.
They want to feel good about themselves. So they're going to say, by the way, from my perspective, you could have done this better. I didn't ask you.
Yeah.
So no, that's one thing. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. So I would say, listen, if I wanted to get better at this, can you give me 2 pieces of advice? Because the moment I ask for advice over feedback, there is more of an investment on the other person's part, and they just deliver it differently. So that's what I would do. And I would say to your audience also, if you're going to find maybe 3 role models for your speaking, then what I would do is I would go to them and say, here's a copy of my speech. Can you and I look at this, and can you give me a couple of pieces of advice? I go to the very best people in that space, the role models that I have, and those are the people that I am very selective in getting the feedback from.
Yeah.
Not just anybody.
Totally. I love that advice. Well, this has been so interesting. I learned so much personally, and I think my audience is probably shaking their heads going, yep, wow, I learned a lot. Let's get to know you a little bit better. I mean, we already heard your amazing Scottish accent, which is so fun. But let's throw you some rapid fire questions. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
All right, Hugh, what is the most important part of your morning routine?
So I'm one of those weird guys. I'm a person of faith. So that's the most important part. I start the morning with that. That and a good, really strong cup of coffee. And that's how I start the day.
Awesome. And what show are you currently streaming right now?
Seaside Hotel.
What channel is that, or
It's
what?
on PBS. My
Okay.
wife loves these shows. And
Okay.
so she's a SVP of marketing, and she's got a stressful day. And we go down there. It's in Danish.
Oh.
Subtitles, but it's actually a really pretty cool show.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. What is your favorite leadership book or resource?
Right now, I'm going to say it's Influenced by Robert Cialdini. It has nothing to do with really leadership per se, but it has everything to do with relationship building, which is really what leadership is all about,
That's
in
awesome.
constituencies and followers.
Okay. What's your idea of perfect happiness?
Well, well, I don't believe in perfect happiness. I just think that there's sometimes good happiness, because if I set it up as perfect, probably perfect happiness is getting in an RV, having my wife and my dog, and going and sitting at the foot of a mountain and just looking up at the mountain and just kind of taking in nature. That is an awesome, joy-filled day.
Okay. And if you could have lunch with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
Got it. And if you had to describe your outlook in one quick motto, what would it be?
Live boldly.
Perfect. Well, this has been so fun, so interesting. If people want to learn more about you or buy your book, what's the best place for them to do that?
Buy the book on Amazon. It's called Lead Boldly, How to Coach Others to Greatness. And they can also find me on my website, clarisconsulting.net.
Awesome. Well, Hugh, this has been great. Hopefully you'll come back, and thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Everybody, you've been tuning into the Modern Customer Podcast. Until next time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow me on social media, including Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and more.